Hello, and welcome to The Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Stephen Eiderstein. Thank you for joining me as we do the review for Chapter 15 of the book, I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. This is the original printing. We did the reading last week out of this book, and this chapter is got a lot of great stuff in it. I do want to say thank you for all the support you've given me and the channel. Please go ahead and subscribe, give us a like, and you can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok as well now, and we also publish on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So please go ahead and check us out there too. I appreciate the support so much, and I'm excited to get into this book and get into this chapter more so, and start tearing it apart a little bit, because there's just so much that goes into a chapter in this type of a book, and it's addressing religion and church and that type of stuff. Now, before the title of this chapter is The Business of Going to Church, Religion, and this is written by a man that was that started his spiritual experience in the Oxford group. And the Oxford group was a very heavily Christian group. So I want to give a disclaimer, because I make an effort to try to keep this podcast considerate, independent, or inclusive of other religious practices, other spiritual practices, not just limited to one religious affiliation. But I have to tell you, this chapter, as I'm sure if you listen to the actual chapter reading, is heavily involved with Christianity and Jesus Christ and that religious practice. So I want to make sure that I say right now that when we talk about God or we talk about Jesus Christ, I wanted to make sure I'm going to make an effort to be to continually insert other openings, other titles that can get incorporated here, just for people to be able to relate. Because the last thing I want to do is push someone away from having a spiritual experience or taking the wisdom that's actually offered in this chapter, because the heavy religious message gets lost on them. So please try to keep an open mind as we go through this chapter review, because there is just some fantastic stuff in it, so I'll make an attempt to continuously inject that, but if I don't, please forgive me. But do know, when I talk about God, when I bring in that aspect and that title and that label, you can use whatever it is that you use. You can use whatever denomination, deity you want to insert. You can use the universe, source, power, energy, creator, mother nature, whatever it is that is a higher power for you. Please make sure you just insert that for yourself, okay? Don't lose the message on this one today. But it is a fantastic message, and I love everything that it talks about in here. And the way he opened this chapter was really, really good. And by the way, you can also get this copy of the book. It's called Believing in False Gods. It's a reprint of the original that I showed you right here. It is literally page for page copy of it, honestly. So this is the one I mark up and I highlight, and I'll be reading out of this one today because I have notes written in it and things like that. So I just wanted to make sure, let you guys know you can get it as this copy too. You don't have to go get the old versions. I love the old versions, but not necessarily for highlighting in. So let's get into it. So this chapter again is called The Business of Going to Church, and the subtitle is Religion. So this entire book up until this point has been talking about, first of all, his own pursuit of finding a spiritual experience, spiritual growth, and finding a spiritual environment to grow spiritually in. And then it's been a lot, and every chapter has gone through a different perspective that he's had to address in his own spiritual journey and in his own walk with God and the God of his understanding. And this is kind of the cross section of his experience and then the typical worldly experience, at least in the United States. So it's an interesting chapter to me to actually see how Kitchen had this experience at the Oxford group and then brought it in, and it crossed paths with mainstream religious practices, right? Because what happens at the Oxford group and what happens in the spiritual circles today, regardless of what your practice is, does eventually cross over with mainstream religion, mainstream practices, and the dominant religions of today. So I was very interested to read this the first time I read it, especially when I read it again for this podcast, and going through and doing this review and taking a look at this has been quite a journey for me. I've related to quite a bit of it. So, and the thing he started out the chapter with too was actually great. He started out with talking about how he talked about how he didn't want to go to church and how he just kind of left God at church. But he found more of religion on the golf course and all these other areas. And how people, and just it reverberated very loudly in today's world, because there's so many people that say, oh, I find religion on the golf course, or like he said, or I find religion in other areas, and how he believed it was important, but he didn't go himself, right? He talked about how he vociferously, which means loudly, I had to look it up in my 1920s dictionary here, had to claim how he loudly claimed that any town worth being a part of had to it must have a church in it, and so his advertisements went wild, like he's an advertising guy, he's a sales guy, so of course he knows how to pitch things, he knows how to make things sound good. So he was just outright hypocritical, saying, hey, a town worth its salt needs to have a church, but he wouldn't go practice there because he thought it was good for other people. He thought he could find his practice of religion and his spiritual fulfillment that he didn't actually know what was in other areas. And if you're I'm a part of 12-step fellowships and also just other religious or spiritual groups and religious groups, and you can hear this so often. People are like, I find all of my church right here, all of my religion right here. And that can be in the rooms of 12-step programs. That could be at the gym. That could be sports. That could be with family. And it's not to say that that's not true in a sense. It's not to say that you don't find that connection that we're looking for. We're not finding that spiritual relatability to another person. You can find that in those locations, you can find a meditative state by going to the gym or playing a sport and being on the team or doing whatever it is that you're doing. Runner's high is a real thing, and people associate that with a spiritual experience and the peace of mind that comes from that, but they'll go anywhere pretty much besides a church or another religious establishment to find God, or to practice with God, or to worship the God of their understanding, whatever God that might be, right? They'll look anywhere else, which in hindsight for me tells me that, hey, maybe I just have a resentment, or I have some crap going on with that, and it has nothing to do with the location, because we like to say this is bad, but the reality of it is it's done a lot of good for a lot of people. I just had the problem. So it's there was something that I really related to when he opened up with that. So then he goes into next the common trope that so many, including myself, have gone down, thinking we know what we're talking about, and trying to just completely redo the church, right? He was talking about how it needed to be modernized. He talked about how the church needed to be more exciting, like having different types of parties and different types of advertisements and different types of attractive things about the church to bring people in, and that'll fill the seats and that'll fill the collection plate, because that's all he could consider. That's all he knew to actually care about was the collection plates and the popularity of a church, right? He even talked about having the Bible rewritten. So Jesus just gets attributed to being, he's a good guy, and he quoted, I think he stated, put him in the likes of Lincoln and Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, impactful, influential people, but just another guy, and kind of take the religious part of and the spiritual part out of church, because he didn't know better. He just thought that's what needed to happen to make it more attractive so they can get more people, because the goal was obviously just numbers from what he could observe, right? And so he was a hypocritical. That's what we learned in the first paragraph. And then arrogant in the next paragraphs, right? Which I don't know about you, but I can definitely relate to. And even people that, even people that get into like 12-step rooms, they're like, oh, I know how to make this place better. I know what needs to happen so we get more people in here. So we do this better than it's always been done. And so it's funny, this newcomer arrogance, or this outsider arrogance, maybe, kind of just kicks in, because it comes from an inherent sense that it has to be broken because it's not working for me. So I have to go fix it to make sure it fits my needs. And the reality is, it's just, I've got so much of my crap going on, I can't even participate in something authentically, So I'm going to read a little bit out of it on 2:17, right at the end there. And we'll talk about it a little bit. It's the second page of this chapter. So, since Jesus Christ has become not a myth, but a living presence to me, since the Holy Spirit has become not a fancy, but a vital power and affection without which I could make no real progress in the business of living, I see that my attempt to quash the deity of Christ and take the supernatural out of religion was as ridiculous as it would be to expect an automobile to run after I lifted out the engine. And I see that my suggestions to advertise the church through dances, card parties, greater toleration, and similar lures was nothing but an attempt to create an attraction and set it up in place of the real attraction I had missed. So he missed the boat entirely, he realized, after he actually had a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience through the Oxford group, and he started living differently, and he started living by the precepts of the Oxford group. Suddenly, he understands you can't take that spiritual component, that supernatural almost component out of this whole thing, because that's what's actually the attractive piece of it, right? It's not all the distracting things. He said card parties and the advertisements and all of this flash and flare. That's not actual attraction. That's actually distraction from a message. It's actually taking away from what people actually need to connect to and what people actually need to participate in. And this happens all over the place, right? And this isn't just with the Christian churches. This is with every single practice. Other people come in trying to modernize, trying to make it look more attractive, trying to make it appeal more to the pleasure hedonistic side of us, right? To entice us in. But it's a false presentation. And what ends up happening is people don't stay anyway. And ever since he had this spiritual experience in the Oxford group, he's been able to actually understand that he missed the boat entirely with this thing, that he actually had no clue, as harsh as this sounds, what he was talking about. He was looking at it from an objective, unawakened, spiritually unawakened individual. And he was looking at it from numbers and materialistic things. So, he just gains this whole new perspective, and he goes on to go on to talk about how the superficial attempts to attract people will just always fail. Like I said, people will come because it's exciting, but when the excitement wears off, guess what? They're not going to be there anymore, because they came because it made them feel pleasure or feel good and feel inclusive. But that's not the actual message, or it's not the actual function that religious body has, and not the actual function of that spiritual community is actually supposed to be filling. And if it doesn't, he starts to talk about how if it doesn't have a genuine spiritual message for people to connect to, it will always be just a rotation of empty seats, superficial attempts to fill them, empty seats, superficial attempts to fill them. It's just it's a cycle that'll just keep going, because people go to where they feel good. People go to the next best thing. They follow whatever it is they're prioritizing. And if they're not getting connected to spiritually, they're going to move on, right? Because most of them don't even know that that's what they're looking for. And that most of them just think like, this is supposed to be exciting and keep me engaged. And when that excitement of the dance wears off, or the card party, or the advertisements just don't have the same effect anymore, suddenly they're moving on. Suddenly they're on to the next thing, right? So he started to realize it's not... Well, he fully started to realize that it's not about all of those things. And there was a great quote in there that he said, the average congregation gets no better minister than it deserves. Right? That's impactful, right? Because everyone believes that it has to be a minister that brings all of the fire and brimstone and the motivation for people to actually pursue a spiritual life, to change their life, to change the way they're living, right? But he goes on to talk about, just with everything, that it starts with us. It starts with the congregation itself that needs to change and have that openness and willingness. I'm going to read page 220 real quick here. And yeah, so we're talking about how we need to be better members of the congregation. And he says, unless I myself experience some change within myself, that will make me a better member. Now, here's the part I have marked. The Oxford group, in short, has shown me that neither my cooperation in advertising nor attempts at criticism are of the slightest avail. They have shown me that I myself must be born in Christ and must grow in this new domain before I can assist such births and aid such growth among members of any church congregation. It is only thus that I can help to build a more deserving congregation and create what advertising men might call a congregational demand for ministers who are not merely preachers, organizers, showmen, job holders, or compromisers, but who are experienced obstetricians of the human soul and practicing dietitians in the matter of spiritual growth and nourishment. So yeah, I mean, holy cow. What a large, what an impactful thing to say there, right? So he's openly acknowledging that he has to change first, right? He has to have this change of heart. And then after that change of heart happens, he can go help other people, right? And I found it interesting that he in that paragraph, he talks about the misunderstanding. It's not the advertising or anything else, right? It's the actual change within ourselves that lets us be able to help foster and elicit change in other people and help grow the quality and grow the spiritual child within the person next to us. He at the end of that, he uses two very important words, or not words, that the last sentence has two very important concepts. How when a congregation has grown spiritually, it will demand to have a leader that can lead them spiritually, not just put on a show, not just be an organizer and run the church or the whatever religious organization you're a part of, right? They demand somebody that is an obstetrician of the human soul and practicing dietitian in the matter of spiritual growth and nourishment. So those are two very important parts of a spiritual leader. All right. So they can help guide a person to have a spiritual experience, right? They can provide them information. They can provide them an understanding. They can provide them a practice that will lead them to a spiritual experience, right? Because I've had one doesn't mean I can just give it to somebody, but I can direct them in the way that I found a spiritual experience that they can have one of their own. But also, he said a dietitian for the nourishment and growth of spirituality. What was it? Matter of spiritual growth and nourishment, right? So it's not only just providing someone the opportunity to have a spiritual experience, but it's about helping them continue to grow past that. And that's something that gets lost a lot of times. That's something that people, they think they just got to have that first conversion experience. They got to have that first spiritual awakening. In the 12 steps of any anonymous group, it says having had a spiritual awakening, right? But that doesn't mean we stop there. That doesn't mean we just call it a day and say, hey, I had this amazing experience. It's going to carry me through for the rest of my life. No, you have to continue moving forward. You have to continue pursuing that spiritual growth, and having a guide, having a spiritual leader in your house of practice is such a crucial thing. And so what he was saying is, I have a spiritual experience. I help someone else have spiritual experiences in the sense of guiding them through the steps and the actions they need to take to have one. And then guess what? The congregation, the group of people that have had all these spiritual awakenings and spiritual experiences, demand to have a leader that can actually show them a direction to go. Now, that's a whole different perspective that doesn't really get talked about much today now, does it? It's something that people just hope happen. People say, I have this experience with God, or I have this experience with my creator, with this source, with this energy, with all of this stuff. And then they're in constant pursuit of that first experience. And it's not about having that first experience again. It's about continuing to make spiritual growth, right? It's not about repeated baptisms. It's not about mystical experiences every single day. It's about having an understanding and having that connection to a power greater than yourself, and then allowing yourself to live differently and following the teachings and the suggestions and the principles of that whatever program or denomination or religion you're a part of. Actually embodying those, right? And when you can actually do that, you continue to deepen your experience with that God of your understanding, with that power greater than yourselves. It allows you to actually build that relationship up. And he goes on also to stress that I love that he pointed this out, because, like I said, a lot of people get lost in this. He stresses that the Oxford group is not a place, or is not its own church. It is a place where people find spirituality. It's a place where people find a spiritual awakening and have spiritual experiences, but it is not a church in and of itself. It's a place where he hopes people can come to become spiritually awakened and have that connection. But what is born there should be brought into your normal practices, into the churches you're a part of, the synagogues you're a part of, the mosques you're a part of, the other religious or spiritual groups that you participate in. The Oxford group should be an addition to that, but it should not only be the Oxford group. You should carry this out of the Oxford group into the world with you, the world that you live in, the world that you're a part of, the communities that you reside in, right? And hopefully bring that spiritual connectedness to those places as well, because it's not supposed to be meant just for the Oxford group. It's not supposed to be meant just for the 12-step rooms. It's not supposed to be meant for your little conference rooms wherever you might meet with your spiritual brothers and sisters, whatever that looks like for you. It's meant to be given to the world. It's not meant to be just hoarded, right? Bring it with you. Share that experience with another person. So that's a pretty tall demand. But he goes on to say there's leaders who have never had that experience of being reborn, and that they're so ineffective at actually leading a group of spiritual individuals. Right? He talked about a missionary that was sent to, I forget, was it Africa? I can't remember. A missionary that was sent, but he had no personal experience of having a spiritual awakening, which might sound amazing, but it's different from just intellectual knowledge and a moral education. A personal relationship with the God of your understanding, with your creator, whatever that looks like for you, is a much different thing to carry than just what's written in books, than just what people have told you is right, what you've learned through your family. Having that personal relationship with the God of your understanding brings a light and an energy and a vigor to a person that, when they lack, is obvious. He then talks about how you read this spiritual literature and all these information, and it just ends up being lifeless. Right? It just has, it's a hollow presentation. It's a hollow reading of these things, rather than this exciting experience and filled with this energy that people actually have within them. It's an entirely different thing. And he talks about how that's just really does a disservice, right? Because, sorry, I had to flip my page. It doesn't actually serve the people that are hearing it, right? So, and then he shared about someone who had a spiritual experienced a spiritual awakening, and it inspired others, and it rebuilt a church, and it rebuilt a congregation, and he would share his personal experience with the people, and they connected with that, right? So when someone has had this spiritual awakening, when they've had this experience of having a personal relationship with the God of their understanding, with that source, that energy, that universal creative potential, whatever it is you want to call it, right? When someone's had an experience like that, they can actually go build. They can build a church. They can build a congregation. They can bring that energy and that revitalizing energy to a group of people. And it's not because they're reading a book to those who could read that same book, but they're sharing their experience they've had with that book. They're sharing their experience they've had with that God of their understanding, that change they've experienced that's overcome them, and they've been filled with this peace and this grace and this understanding, right? And when someone shares from the soul in that way, it's an entirely different experience. People become, inspired. People want to hear that. People want to actually come and participate in that. Instead of feeling like it's just a difficult task or a chore that they don't want to actually go do. And this is evidenced in 12-step fellowships today. Personal testimonies, right? People have speaker meetings. People share their experience at 12-step meetings, right? And other types of meetings, recovery meetings in general. And also in the clinical world, whether it's mental health or substance use or whatever it may be, there's the leveraging of a job role called peer specialists now, where people that have had a lived experience with recovery, whatever that might be for that instance, share their experience with that person to give them support and offer them help and a helping hand. So it shows that experience, whether it be what some would consider a spiritual awakening or a recovery in a different way of life, is impactful. It makes a difference to those around you. And it draws people in because people want to feel that hope. They want to feel that possibility, right? People were shown a different direction that they didn't know was possible and didn't just get read to. So I'm going to read another outtake from this real quick. All right. And this outtake that I'm going to read is about the resistance that we can feel when we're trying to bring a spiritual message. When someone has had an experience and they're trying to actually share a message of hope and encouragement and a message of substance, there can be a lot of resistance to it. And he talks about it here on page 225. Many congregations, of course, do not like to have such a man come to them. They were comfortable before, too complacently asleep, and they resent the intrusion of so real a challenge to their old way of living. You know, they've become accustomed to. They've become, they've developed a preference to not having to change, to not having to grow and sacrifice, right? And he says, as Finney says, if you have too much of the Spirit of God, you must make up your mind to have much opposition. Very likely the leading men in the church will oppose you, right? And he says it's about the pastor that went in and rebuilt the church. So he goes in and does it. Not everyone wants that message. A lot of people, and some people don't know this, to be fair, because this might sound harsh, but people don't want to have to sacrifice their worldly pleasures and what would be considered in Christianity their sins, right? They want to just keep living the way they're living and not have anyone tell them any different. They don't want to actually go through and be willing to sacrifice. So not everyone wants the message that a true spiritual experience brings, a true spiritual awakening entails. There's many that are actually resistant to it because they're more comfortable in their selfish way of living. And he goes on to say that this need of constant guidance and growth needs to be emphasized. And without guidance and growth, people will die spiritually, right? Because we're talking about two things here. We're talking about a church that's never being led by someone that's never had the experience, right? And then, we're keeping on going into it, and then having a church that gives just the initial experience, but doesn't help people actually grow and mature in this. There's a great quote. He says, I remained an adult spiritual infant because he was raised in a church. He got baptized in a church and he had an experience with God ever so slightly when he was young, but that was it. No one told him to do anything different. No one told him how to actually do it, or at least he didn't hear it. He wasn't led by somebody that had had such an experience, right? And a lot of people sit right there. A lot of people have that singular spiritual awakening, that singular spiritual experience, and then they don't move past it. They don't continue to grow in their knowledge and depth and understanding of God of their understanding. They don't take on the disciplines and the sacrifices to live a life to develop that spiritual depth of character. And a lot of the times, well, V.C. Kitchen says it's most times due to the fact that there is no teacher that has been willing to show them. They have not been truly shown the way of a spiritual way of life, a spiritual way of living, to live by virtue and principle rather than just take one singular action so you can actually take one serious. They haven't been shown anything else but doing one thing, having a singular experience, and thinking that's all they needed to do for the rest of their lives. It's a totally different thing. He was one of those people. That's what he says. I remained an adult spiritual infant because, he had that experience. And he never looked for God's guidance in his life because he didn't know it was something that he needed to do. He didn't realize that was kind of the main purpose of having that experience, is to have a first experience with that power greater than yourself, and then to continue to grow in its depth and knowledge and understanding. He didn't know that there was a practice and a way of living that was associated with it. He never learned to pray. He never learned to listen. Prayer and meditation was a huge thing for him. And he goes on to talk about what he called Christianity light, and how some practices gave people an easy out, right? Like, we're gonna make it real easy for you. We're gonna take the good parts of it and mix it in with all these other things. And I'm actually gonna read that part. It's on page 229 here. Later, though, I did not then rejoin the church. I rejoined through my approval that modern school of eclectic compromise, which seeks to take the best parts of Christianity, meaning the easiest, and to combine them with other sugar pills in a religious dose that was not as difficult as Christian rebirth and its equally difficult growing pains. I applauded these modern church idealists, calling them up-to-date and broad-minded, as I had applauded the free thinkers who offered easy escape from the consequences of marriage. So he's saying right there, he never rejoined he didn't rejoin the church right away. He was kind of going around and took this Christianity light, where it was just like, yeah, you don't have to do all of these things. You just, kind of do whatever you want, but just say this, acknowledge that, and up to date and broad-minded thinkers, it's whatever you want it to be. I don't think it's supposed to go like that. Whatever I wanted it to be put me down a very negative, selfish, and self-righteous path, right? I was completely self-centered. That's where that thinking gets me. And then he goes on to say at the bottom of 229 to 230, the new school of eclectic compromise could not face the labor of climbing towards the best and the highest. Just hang out right where you're at. You're good enough just as you are, which is almost a dangerous message for many. Where one produces no spiritual children, right? That's the uninspired person. The other produces spoiled children. Like the mother who gives a boy chocolate cake because he does not want to eat his meat, they give their followers a soft way out. Naturally, there is no growth there. or only a stunted or diverted growth. For a full and straight growth of the Spirit, there can be no compromise when striving for Christ's standard of absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. So he references the four absolutes there, right? So he's saying any spiritual practice that does not emphasize living a life based on virtue and principle, and you just scapegoat out of it, you use these and people do it in 12-step all the time. Man, it's progress, not perfection, when they knowingly engage in dishonesty or something of that nature. If you're choosing to do it, that's not something that's excusable, right? Like if you're knowingly entering into it, completely different than impulsively doing an old behavior, right? So there's no cop-outs. Any practice that would allow for cop-outs and a lack of forward motion and a lack of accountability just provides for spoiled children. And spoiled spiritual children. And I thought that was hilarious because how many people are like, well, I prayed to God. I didn't get what I wanted. I did all of these things, but I haven't gotten what I want yet. Here's your chocolate cake, right? It's amazing to think that this was written, again, 1934 it was published, so I don't even know when then. Probably written in the late 20s, early 30s before it was fully published and circulated, right? So it's amazing to me because this was the same stuff and the same problems that we have today. Everyone's like, well, I'm doing this. I'm checking the boxes, right? This one, but I'm still not getting what I want because that's not the point of it. That is not the point at all. You don't just do it because you have this expectation that like God's going to give you everything you want, right? That's such a selfish and self-centered way to actually go about this stuff, right? We do this because living a virtuous and principled lifestyle aligns with the God of our understanding and our Creator, and we act in a way and we think and behave in a way that aligns with that. And then as a side effect, we have these amazing things happen. But if your goal is to just get the amazing things, you're going to fail every single time because you still have a selfish and self-centered intention. No, there's those of us in this world that believe that you can actually change that selfishness and that you can actually live have service and God-centered, Christ-centered orientation. And when you do that, your life changes. And you don't even necessarily know it when it's changing. It's kind of amazing. So this spoiling or this inexperienced leadership, people don't live by principle. And he continues to emphasize the fact that having a personal experiences, personal spiritual awakening is a crucial part of being able to come back to this world and to be able to actually bring something into your community, into your church, right? Into your religious practice. Instead of going to take, what can you bring? Can you bring that excitement? He talks about how he even gets messages from those who are uninspired and those who haven't had an experience anymore. He talks about how his practice of prayer and meditation, prayer and listening is what he called it, and has just deepened his experience in this world. And he just talks about how it's a whole new understanding of what he brings to the church with him. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And that's what we have to change too. That's what I've had to change as well. When I bring myself to these practices, these spiritual engagements, right? If I bring myself to church, what am I bringing with me? Am I bringing my spiritual experience to be able to share with others, or am I expecting them to just give to me and I take, right? Do I want to help somebody else, or just am I so focused on myself only that I can't even see anyone else's hurt or pain and suffering that I could help with? This was an incredible chapter to read. So that's it, though. That's it. We got to the end. The next chapter is chapter 16, this business of being of use to people. Ooh, I'm excited about that one too. All right. That's going to be another great one. So, I'm really looking forward to reading that one next week with y'all. Please go ahead, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think about it. And I'll be back again next week. So until next time, thanks.